Welcome everybody. Welcome to the Pacific Seminar Series with the Australian Centre for Pacific Islands Research. Thanks everybody for joining us. Today we'd like to acknowledge today's seminar is being held on the traditional lands of the Gubbi Gubbi people. We acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging, and recognise their continuing connection to country. Today's session will be recorded. Thank you everyone for muting your microphones. At the end of today's session, we'd like to open up a discussion. If anybody has any questions, they're welcome to put them in the chat as we go. Otherwise, at the end, we'll open to a bit of Q&A with our wonderful presenter today. We're fortunate to have ACPIR industry fellow Luke Hawley presenting on biosecurity development in the Pacific, experiences in entomology and risk management. Luke is a biosecurity and entomology consultant advancing biosecurity development across Australia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor and the Solomon Islands. He has a track record of implementing effective controls for federal governments, the FAO and the horticulture industry. Today, Luke will share how his passion for bugs led to a career spanning more than 20 years across Australia and tropical developing countries, surveying and identifying pest insects and mites, Australian and European honeybee and parasites, including Varroa. That was the easy one to say too. Tropilaelaps. Yep. And tracheal mites. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Luke to enlighten us. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Just wanted to check firstly, can people hear me?
Yep.
In the room we can. Anyone online, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Got a thumbs up, awesome. All right, so yeah, I'll talk about biosecurity development in the Pacific, just my experiences in entomology and risk management. I'll talk from my perspective's been Australian biosecurity mostly. I worked for the Australian Federal Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry for 20 years. I'll refer to them as DAF, not to be confused with Queensland DAF. So there are a few of us around, but yeah, that was, yeah, or DPI. The names change at times, but when I refer to DAF, I'll just be talking about that federal department that I worked for 20 years. I'm now a consultant, so I play a small part in some larger projects and programs. I've just started here with a picture of some Varroa mites, some parasites that get onto bees and some training that we did in Papua New Guinea. So firstly, just talk about what I'm going to cover is invasive risks and then the biosecurity that goes to address those, the Australian situation, the cost benefits to biosecurity, some of the challenges in Pacific nations, some specific examples, and what I've learned from that sort of stuff. So I'll start off firstly with invasive pests. So I'm talking about all sorts of insects, weeds, pathogens that affect ecosystems, disrupt trophic interactions and threaten biodiversity. And ultimately they burden the ecological and economic systems around the world. And global economic losses from invasives are estimated around $2 trillion per year. And crop loss alone is about $200 to $300 billion from pests and diseases. So as an entomologist, I'll be talking the insect side of things mostly. I will cover a little bit of other aspects, but obviously there's both plant and animal diseases. I'll talk a little bit about them. There's also the whole world of human health side of it, biosecurity. Which I won't cover much because that's not my area, and there's actually a separate department that works with that. Department of Health deals with federal biosecurity for human health. There's a little bit of an overlap there though with zoonotic diseases, which cover they go from animals to humans. Usually these issues come from related to predator-prey relationships, the invasive risks, and it's often when a species reaches a naive host or a new environment which lacks the predators and parasites that normally keep their populations in check. So again, going back to the example of Varroa, there's a picture there in the bottom left. That's a Varroa mite at the posterior end of a bee pupa, and there's actually a Tropilaelaps mite shown there above the bee as well. Both of these significant parasites of bees. Starting with Varroa, partly because it's a current biosecurity focus, and also a starting point of my career. So you might have heard about this parasite. It feeds on bees and spreads viruses through the bees, which has crippled the bee industry in many parts of the world. And more recently, it's got into Australia, starting from New South Wales, and it is spreading out. And in some ways, you might see that as a failure of biosecurity, but in some ways, I see it as a bit of an achievement, because when I first started with that DAF 25 years ago, I had a little bit of experience already with bees in Thailand and had experienced Varroa a little bit there. So one of the first jobs they gave me was to look at imported honeybees. They're actually importing honeybees, and we were checking them for mites. And the first consignment I was shown I found Varroa mites on them. So they are quite common, and they've been coming into Australia for decades, mostly not through that pathway, but through hitchhiking on shipping containers. You get swarms of bees on shipping containers, and the mites and the bees get brought across that way. But through biosecurity measures, they've kept it out for 25 years. So, and that the benefit of that is that that's every year is another year that the honey industry, the pollination industry, didn't have to deal with that pest. And it also meant another year of control and management research that went on overseas that now helps Australia, now that we have got it to manage that. So even if you accept that you're not going to keep things out forever, the longer you can keep them out, the more benefits you can get from that. And some other examples there. So that beautiful picture in the middle is screwworm fly. That's actually just a cut in a cow and a 6-day infestation from screwworm fly. So these nasty little maggots have a taste for flesh, and not rotting flesh as some maggots do. They go for healthy flesh, and so they can end up killing animals and can get people as well. And found in Asia, and there's another species over in the Americas that causes problems. So a few of the insects we don't want to get in. There's other diseases. So foot and mouth disease, that's shown on the right, is a really high risk for Australia, especially as we've got a large cattle livestock industry. And simulations of that disease showed that if we've got a large outbreak in Australia, it could cost about $52 billion to try and deal with that. And due to our large feral pig population, it'd actually be quite difficult to control that at all. And I won't mention, obviously, there's numerous animal diseases. There's national lists of these priority diseases, such as this national list of notifiable animal diseases. And most countries have priority diseases and pests lists that they use to focus their targets and their efforts on. I'll just mention bird flu as well, because that one's a bit topical as well. The H5N1 strain is considered quite risky. It was, I think, pre-COVID and even after COVID, it's been seen as a potential for pandemics, and it's now in all parts of the world apart from Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the Pacific. It's even hit Antarctica. And I think they've estimated over 300 million birds have died in the last 3 years from it. So really devastating. And it's getting into mammals, and there's increasing cases with humans. So a lot of nasties in that area. And then we jump to the plant and environmental pests. Again, there's lists with hundreds of priorities and thousands of potentials that could cause troubles for Australia and other countries. And for the Pacific generally, there's a couple of bacteria that are very high on those lists. One's Xylella, which is hitting grapes and olives in the Americas and Europe, and spread by an insect vector. Another one's HLB, or Huanglongbing bacterium, which is spread by that insect on the left, Asian citrus psyllid, and has caused devastation to citrus industries in the Americas.
It's now in Tonga.
And now in Tonga, apparently, so getting closer. It's also, it's gotten as close as Papua New Guinea. There's some up in the northwest, but fortunately that hasn't spread further as yet. Capra beetle is another one, really tiny. When you look at that, that's grains of rice, and that's the adults, an adult and a larva. The larva has hairs that can cause irritation and allergies. So when it gets into grain, it can cause problems for use of that food. And so really big risk for grain industries, especially for countries like Australia. They're heavily reliant on exporting grain. We're trying to keep that one out. And it's a really difficult pest to control. It can go quite dormant when there's no food around. It can live on its own, shed skins or human hair. It was coming in on packaging around new refrigerators a few years ago, so things that you wouldn't expect to be high risk. So it's a pretty scary one. It's established in the last 5 years in East Timor as well, so it's getting closer. So just looking at invasive species risks for the Pacific, and in particular looking at Australia first, we've got this short history of rapid global trade and industries. Prior to that, not a lot of movement, small amounts of movement, obviously over centuries and thousands of years with people, but nothing like the rapid movement we've got recently. We've got clearly geographic isolation, as you can see with the map, and we have strong biosecurity measures in Australia and New Zealand, the strictest pretty much in the world, which is a bit topical at the moment with tariffs. But other Pacific nations have got similar situation of that geographic isolation, high biological endemism, so different plants and animals to much of the rest of the world, but less strength in the biosecurity that they've got in place at the moment. So that's something that's being worked on, as I'll talk about later. So when it's referring to biosecurity, I'm just talking about security from biological risks, so through prevention and control. And all those biosecurity risks require the combination of obviously a source that they're coming from, a pathway to get across from that source, a receptive environment, so it's got to be the right climate, the right host if they rely on a host, and then also spread potential, which can be quite interesting when you think about some of the cases where things have and have not established. So I think often assumptions underestimate pathways of things being able to get to a new environment, but also overestimate the establishment. So surveillance across Northern Australia and other studies around the world have shown numerous cases of exotic species entry without that establishment. And if you just think of rabbits, of all things, it took a few intentional introductions to actually get them established in Australia. So it can be quite difficult to model what the risks are due to size and complexity of biological and geographic systems. but the major risks can be estimated and mitigated. So I'll be talking again about federal biosecurity, but it also occurs at other levels. You have the state departments, you have within states. If you look at that picture at the top, there's over 20 biosecurity zones that the state department manages in Queensland. You're probably aware of things like the fire ant zones, but there's also ones for bananas and other crops and the likes to reduce the risk of those things moving. So biosecurity, just looking at the scale of things coming into Australia, I don't have the numbers for other Pacific countries, but roughly you might be looking at 150 million mail items coming into the country each year. A very small proportion are risk, and there's about 30,000 items seized, but it's still a significant amount of things coming in. Some weird and wonderful things come in through the mail, and there have been cases where you get things like a frog breeding kit complete with frogs. This is just a picture of one that you can purchase online, but fortunately a lot of those online shops have improved in controlling what is sent to places like Australia. And I've used that one as an example because African clawed frog is thought to be the spread of chytrid fungus, the fungus that's devastated frogs around the world over the last few decades. It's thought the African clawed frog, which was actually used for pregnancy testing, got spread around and that spread that fungus around the world. So as well as mail items, you've got 8 million international travellers with close to 500,000 items being seized per year and 15,000 international vessels. I've just mentioned BICON there. It's the Biosecurity Import Conditions database that you can look up online if you're interested to know what you can and can't bring into the country, permits and other things like that. I've just shown some pictures at the bottom. There's thousands of staff in that department that I used to work for. Obviously, there's inspectors at the airports, seaports, mail centres, and also laboratories, abattoirs. That picture on the bottom right is Mark, who's a plant pathologist, so he'd been looking at what's been found through imports, and I spent 5 years in Sydney looking at the insects that inspectors would find, determining what they were, what the risks were, and how they could be managed. And we get about 35 samples a day back then when I was in there, so quite a lot of material to look at. So most of those risks are through what we call regulated pathways, those airports, seaports. But it was recognised in the 1980s that there was a smaller but significant risk right across northern Australia because things could be coming in through other means. And these pictures just to reflect some of that. So you get yachts that sometimes will not tell you they're coming to Australia but may stop off in remote parts of the north. You get foreign fishing vessels also stopping in the north, some just to collect fresh water or to do fishing. And on fresh water, one trial we looked at, we found that about 70% of the water, the drinking water that they were carrying had dengue fever mosquito larvae in there. So along with that, you've got Tim's borers, termites, exotic termites and the likes in those vessels as well. You get magpie geese and other birds and bats fly internationally and can bring viruses with them. So vets look at the avian influenza risks of those. I've got a bit of food garbage just up the top to point out that garbage gets brought to Australia. There's major shipping pathways across the north, and garbage gets illegally thrown overboard at times. And you need those feral pigs to pick it up on the beach in the north and spread it. And lastly, that map is just to indicate the northwest monsoonal winds that come every year and blow things across from Indonesia, Timor, Papua New Guinea, and trapping's shown that exotic species do get blown across there. And that's what I was talking about. Most cases, they don't actually establish. But some of them do. We had a case of sugarcane smut hit the Ord River irrigation area, which is right up in the north of WA. And that was certainly come from Indonesia, blown across. And that wiped out the sugar industry there. So I said Australia's isolated, but the closest we are to another country is when you look at the Torres Strait, particularly to Papua New Guinea. The northernmost islands, such as Saibai and Boigu, are only 3 to 4 kilometres from mainland PNG. So no distance at all for a fruit fly to get blown across. Even deer swim across at times that stretch. And there's a lot of people movement and goods movement. There's traditional treaties to enable them to continue traditional movements, as has happened for thousands of years. And there's biosecurity officers through the Torres Strait to manage those biosecurity risks. And fruit flies, every year the oriental fruit fly gets blown into Torres Strait, and every year the government knocks it back out. And prior to that northern focus, mango fruit flies, as an example, came into Cape York in the 70s and moved down to Townsville by the late 90s. And it's a good example of what would happen with other pests. Only the mango fruit fly is a bit limited biologically, so it's unlikely to go further than Townsville, but from experience, I can say it's a big problem in Cairns and your mangoes. Red banded mango caterpillar was one that came in later, and by then there was biosecurity measures, state and federal, to manage that, reduce the risk of fruit being moved further south. So that one got to Cape York Peninsula in 2000, but hasn't moved any further since. But it's not a wall blocking everything. Some cases, such as fall armyworm, which you may have heard about, was a big global focus. Recently, it moved rapidly through Asia and Africa, and more recently in the Pacific. And when it got to Australia, we first trapped it in Torres Strait in January 2020. But it can move 100 kilometres a night under its own steam. So there was really nothing we could do in terms of biosecurity, other than it enabled us to prepare industries for it coming in and planning for management. But yeah, within that same year, it hit Victoria in December. So to deal with these risks, when you can't be determining at the border, you've got domestic surveillance goes on. So that's me swinging a net up in the Ord River irrigation area on rice. Magpie geese get caught for a blood sample to check for bird flu. Feral pigs and feral animals are tested for other diseases, and botanists look at the weed risks, such as gamba grass, which causes big problems with fires. It causes more intensive fires up in the Northern Territory. But that's how I became involved in, through the department, in offshore surveillance and training as well. So you can see there, botanists pressing plants, vets taking blood samples, work on honeybees, and training on plant pests and diseases in those regions. And that training is really two ways. Australia does provide capability and capacity training, but it also, big advantage for Australia is being able to recognise those pests and what damage it does before it comes into the country, and potential to manage those pests to reduce that risk of it coming into the country. As fun as all that lab work looks, all the field work looks, there's lab work to be done. The pork can staff are still, as far as I know, they're still dealing with 500,000 fruit flies a year, and that need to be individually identified. Waiting out for a genetic or some sort of solution that will address that more easily, but I don't think that's come yet. So obviously a lot of work done there, and the federal budget is about $250 million a year, but the value of that has been estimated, the value of the whole federal biosecurity system, estimated about $314 billion in total. And for every dollar spent, you get $30 benefit. So makes it sound like you just should keep throwing money into it because you're always saving money, but obviously there's limits to that, and you don't necessarily get that benefit in dollars, and not necessarily straight away. It can be over long periods of time. Australia is also a large exporter of produce, so it has a huge benefit for Australia in that way. So this model's not really feasible, let alone practical, to replicate in small countries in the Pacific. And just to look at a bit of theory, the generalised invasion curve, this is actually quite simple. So on the x-axis, you've got time, and you can see a little green arrow is the entry of invasive species. And the y-axis just represents the area occupied, or you could think that the population size of an invasive pest. And that the growth of that area occupied, that line there, shows that there's a point where the pest is not present, it slowly increases and rapidly increases, and then eventually levels off. Usually, if you don't have much in the way of detection methods, it's when there's that rapid increase that you notice the problems of that pest or disease, and you're looking at asset-based protection, so ongoing costs and management. But the earlier you can deal with these risks, the better. If you look at the orange area, the prevention, so before something even gets in, if you can keep it out of the country in the first place, looking at the bottom part, that economic returns suggests that roughly you might be looking at 1 to 100, so maybe $1 spent to $100 saved. If you can perform, you can achieve that, stop the pest getting in. If you get to the point of eradication where it's gotten in, but you've got potential to eradicate, you get less of an economic return, but still quite significant. And then if you get to containment, is that next level if you can't eradicate. Again, the cost goes up. So the point of this is really whatever you can prevent prior to invasive species establishment is going to be the most cost effective. And it's also, once you get to the eradication and containment phases that we've seen with pests and diseases in Australia and elsewhere, it's never guaranteed that's going to be effective either. So obviously that's in mind when you're looking at biosecurity with smaller budgets or smaller nations. But how else can we support biosecurity in smaller nations? Currently, there is a strong political focus on the Pacific, and multiple international agencies and many projects are going on there. And so the challenges that I see, multiple agendas, gaining that local trust and support, and project longevity, so that you're working at a practical pace, and obviously you're after effective outcomes. So I won't go through all the acronyms, but just to say there's a lot of organisations involved in Pacific biosecurity, and I've seen often in a single country there might be 12 organisations involved, in addition to the biosecurity organisation of that country itself. And you can see there's a bit of an overlap with their goals to what they're trying to achieve in those countries. So there's a challenge there of trying to make the work effective, and you can see that that funding can be significant with these projects, and sometimes they're quite short term, and local, even on the scale of the local organisations, they're not always working together. So it can create competition for resources, and even cases where I've seen skilled staff competition to use those staff for different aspects. So obviously it requires good communication and collaboration to be effective. And fortunately, the ones that I'm aware of, there are regular communications with many of these organisations. And there's, for example, monthly meetings to coordinate what their focus is and who does what. So some examples of work that I've been involved in. There's some intergovernmental work. So with DAF and NARCIA, for over 20 years, they've been building surveillance, training and capacity building. You can see that's us looking at some, I think it was fusarium damage to bananas in PNG, and us visiting the highlands, look at some of that work. And just sort of worth mentioning that that the stakeholder buy-in and benefits that are really needed for a lot of projects. So obviously you need that willingness in a project. Sometimes it's not obvious what the benefits can be for people, and that needs to be at least explained and in some cases improved. So we've had cases where we do surveillance, and obviously our aim is to look for exotic pests. That doesn't really help the landholders much, but we need landholders' support to get access to the land and ideally to be guided where they think there's issues. And one of the most extreme cases I had was in the Highlands, where there was a bit of a heated exchange between government staff who were working with us and landholders. And all I could pick up in the conversation, I kept hearing the word bioprospecting, which was quite weird because we're in a remote area. But that seemed to be a hot topic at the time, and there was belief that foreigners were coming in and just taking samples away, which may have been the case. I don't know the details behind it, but they wanted cash for any samples we were going to take. And it took a bit to explain what we're doing, why we're there, to help that. But furthermore, we found that when even government visited, which was rare because it was so remote, they didn't return, and there wasn't feedback getting back to those landholders. And it seemed that communications were difficult and resources just weren't there to provide that. So a little bit of a solution we found was providing pest sheets and disease guidance and the likes, and preparing before we went to a region, working out what the common problems were, so we could at least provide something that might aid those landholders a bit more. So yeah, a bit of a learning that try and get the most buy-in from any stakeholders. For Solomon Islands, the Biosecurity Solomon Islands, and DAF have also been working for 10 years now. They've got a Solomon Islands Biosecurity Development Program been going on. I've been involved in plant health surveys, training and capacity building as part of that, but I think there's also strategic and managerial components to those developments to try and help aid the biosecurity strength there. So you just see pictures of us doing mostly plant health surveys in the Solomons there. And more recently, since I've left the department, still been a little bit involved in some of this work. Last year there was a detection of believed to be an exotic termite in the Solomon Islands. So I went over there to help identify the problem and how widespread that was. So we did some delimitation, surveillance and identification. That picture in the top left is the exotic termite at the top and a native species below. There was actually another native species in the same genus that was larger than the exotic, and their sizes all overlapped. The differentiation was hairs on the head, which also varied between individuals. So you had to get a number of specimens to try and get an average to determine which was which. So it was a bit of a challenge, but we managed to work out that this exotic was widespread already. I would have been there for a number of years, I think at least 10 years, possibly more. Although it was doing a lot of damage, it was beyond the means of really putting in biosecurity measures. So as I said with that graph, you're beyond control measures. And so you're looking at costly management methods. And furthermore, looking at those two pictures of damage, that's not the exotic, that's native termites that they've got there, infesting the ceiling of a bathroom and the foundations of a house. And that village where the foundations were damaged, every house was riddled with termites. There was no ant capping, that metal plate that you put above the foundations. And there was a brand new house being built at the time right behind that house pictured, and it was exactly the same, except it actually had the timber foundations going straight to the ground. So the point of that was to highlight to government that the building construction methods are the focus and really should be the cheaper and easier method of managing termites in general, rather than using expensive pest control through chemicals and lights. I'm now working with the BSI on an early warning system. So again, trying to get that part of the graph, that orange bit, prevention stage, to make that more effective, because obviously the costs are less there. So it's like a guide to biosecurity horizon scanning, so being aware of changes in risk of invasives prior to their detection in the country. And it sounds like it could be, quite a complicated system, but there's already a lot of early warning systems around the world, and that information gets to Pacific countries. So this is what I'm looking at, is just a simple system where you assess that according to the risks of the local country, to determine when and how much effort you put into different pests. So, for example, a lot of pest alerts around the world are for temperate pests, which are obviously not a focus for tropical countries. And fall armyworm is another example where you might not put so much energy into, because the biosecurity measures aren't going to stop its movements. And for a lot of these countries, they weren't growing much maize or rice, which were the main issues, the main hosts for that pest. So sometimes you get attention drawn to something that's of global significance, but really shouldn't be taking away from the core priorities of a country. And just some other experiences I've had. One of them was in Tuvalu with a yellow crazy ant outbreak. The UNFAO had asked me to urgently assess them on site. But I did find that doing a bit of investigation beforehand, that the requests had come to multiple agencies. Yellow crazy ants have been present there for 10 years. And there was actually a management plan and training provided 6 years prior. So this is one of the most invasive species in the world. You can see it on the right there with scale insects, often has a mutualistic life with scale and mealybugs and the likes, and can explode in numbers in these cases. Like in Tuvalu, they were pretty desperate because people just couldn't sleep because ants were running all over them, animals were being killed. It's pretty nasty pest. But looking at it, the reality is that it's too long established for biosecurity measures. And there were networks already in place. New Zealand expertise had been in there, and really it just needed the support to continue with that management plan, applying those principles and ensuring that the local staff were well trained in the methods of managing it themselves. And it needs that assistance until it's known they're independent and can do the sort of initiate response work themselves. I've just noted a little Pacific invasive ant toolkit that's online, specifically dealing with many of these sorts of cases. And at the same time, I was asked to urgently assess Pacific fruit flies, and I found that urgency really came from external budgeting issues rather than pest-related things. So that was of interest to see, try and get the understanding of where you might there's direction that comes from, particularly in very large organisations that might be quite distant, and then when you get the local insight, there's quite a difference. You try to ideally work to cover both of those aspects, incorporate the needs of both parts to get an outcome. And so again, looking into a bit of networking, found that this was a request that had gone out to multiple agencies. Pest have been present for 14 years, and the Pacific community, SPC, which is a scientific community in the Pacific, was about to visit and treat the fruit flies. So I managed to coordinate my visit to be the same time as them, rather than overlapping or doing different aims for the same thing. And the outcome of that was training staff, local staff to manage the pest, and SPC to continue supporting the management, because the plans they had in place seemed quite effective. And while they reviewed a bit of the internal and external biosecurity, because if you've got biosecurity measures at any point, they need to be supported at different levels. You can't have a local control or local eradication if the things just continues coming back into those areas. And final example, I just thought it'd be a good little plug to mention Australian Volunteers, which is funded by Australian Aid. They've got a lot of, last I looked, there was about 50 assignments posted on their website. Many of those are in the Pacific. And this is something where they provide travel, medical accommodation, food expenses to support people doing some volunteer work. So you're only donating your time. And in some cases, if you can align that with your work, then you may be able to be paid while you're doing it as well. So just something for people to consider. It's very highly supported before, during and after your assignment. And I did a short stint in Laos teaching entomology to the Department of Ag staff there. Often the assignments are about 6 months to 2 years, but there are some shorter ones, and particularly where it's looking at a particular project or research, it might be a short stint, and you can actually you can create your own projects if you can get it supported, particularly with, you need local country support. They'll often support a project as well. And so in the case that I was dealing with, the Crawford Fund had come up with a project and then got Australian Volunteers to support that. So just thought that's something to keep in mind. And also, when I was talking about project longevity, if you turn up to somewhere, short period, do a little bit and leave, it's very unlikely that sort of continues. If you can be part of a longer legacy, though, it doesn't mean that you have to be you don't have to be there yourself for a long time, but as long as you're working collaboratively with others. And in my case, I had a very good mentor from the Crawford Fund who had good connections locally. So I was able to jump in hit the ground running. And I was also following other volunteers that had done work there and will be followed after by further volunteers. So it was a project that didn't just come and go, but continues with that support long term. So again, looking at the challenges, I mean, a lot of you probably got more experience than me in Pacific, so it's just my experiences. But to me, I see the biggest challenge is time, having the time to prepare for projects, getting that cultural understanding and trust and networks, and really trying to get long project terms and working at a practical pace. And some of the solutions that I've found has just been that focus on communication and really trying to get a mutual understanding and common goals to make those more effective, and having simple practical outcomes so that they will be continued and implemented in the first place. And collective efforts, both locally and with international organisations. As I said, if you can work with people and collaborate, or at least work off the basis of other projects, and particularly if it's inclusive and mutually beneficial for everyone, then you're more likely to get that ongoing support long term. I mean, that's pretty much it. As I was taught well in government, they're always saying biosecurity is a shared responsibility. So if you see something unusual, please report it. In Australia, there's a number of hotlines, and all the Pacific nations have got their own biosecurity sections, which will have contacts online or phone numbers. So as I pointed out, the earlier you detect something, the better you can manage it. And that's it.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you. We do have time for some questions if anybody would like to put anything to our presenter, Luke, our resident expert for today. Had a few people saying thank you and goodbye.
Bronwyn has her hand up. Okay.
Yep. Hello, Bronwyn. Did you have a question for Luke?
Just turning my camera on. More a comment, and again, Luke, yeah, I think some of your comments, I think, just so true around longevity, relationships, technical expertise. So yeah, really just wanted to acknowledge that. And I think, I work with one of the programs that was listed on the slide that that Luke had put up there, amongst the very, very many that are out there. Sometimes coordinating well, sometimes coordinating less well. But yeah, really just acknowledging that I think there's a lot of technical issues that get discussed, as Luke very, comprehensively put up there today. But I think so much of it comes down to the sharing of information and intent. So yeah, really just wanted to highlight that it's really good to hear that sort of, I guess, breadth of what's being talked about. And as he said, anything that can be done to keep that going, and seeing that, I guess, anything that's that gets done is part of this ongoing journey. And you can look at this sort of debate of, if a project's going for 20 years, is it really capacity development? And those debates, but the issues keep coming, people keep turning over. So yeah, that was more just a comment. And there's always something to be done if someone's interested and wants to be part of it. Thanks.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Yeah, I think it is an ongoing work, as it is for everyone. Like as I pointed with Australian biosecurity, there's always more to be done. As much as the funds look quite large, there's always risks. But working collaboratively with the Pacific has certainly got some great opportunities for Australia, as well as supporting those nations themselves.
No.
Thanks, Bronwyn. We also have a question from Raina. I'll just jump across.
Two people I've got to email. Sorry.
Are you on mute, Raina?
Stephen, turn you off.
Oh, no.
Okay, I'm not on mute anymore. So,
Perfect.
Rainer Hoffman here from Lincoln University in New Zealand. Thank you so much for that talk. I've spent a bit of time in the Pacific and especially in Samoa to learn about their biosecurity issues. And so my question for you is whether you've come across community-led approaches to pest monitoring and biosecurity resilience in the areas you've worked in the developing space.
Good question. I have come across some work, and I guess there's a number of things, both community and industries. It depends on the individual group. Some communities are quite proactive. Likewise, some industries are quite proactive. There's some groups. Again, the Solomon Islands. Just trying to think it was called Custom Garden.
Yeah.
Really great network. So others know them as well. Very, very keen to work collaboratively with outside organisations, internal organisations, and spread the word through their farming networks. And so they were keen to be involved in biosecurity, and they do local training, I believe, on site to teach farmers. And then they do sort of train the trainer to get those farmers to spread the message. So some of those sound very effective in managing some of those risks, and it's just providing them information that will help them further. And you just hope that the international funds and support can really help, but I think in some cases it can also divert attention. In worst cases, as I said, it pulls people away from core priorities, and they end up focusing on something else because the funds are there and they're told that's what they should be working on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess that doesn't cover too much about communities, but I believe there are cases of that. And there's other sections that deal more with people that deal more with the agricultural extension than I do, that probably would be more aware of those areas. So like I'd be dealing, say, for Solomon Islands, it was the biosecurity team as opposed to the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock more generally that have the extension staff. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. And on behalf of ACPIR, if we don't have any more questions, on behalf of ACPIR, I'd like to thank you for presenting today's event. It's a really insightful presentation. Thank you for taking us through some of the topics around biosecurity and the projects that you've worked on. I really liked the emphasis on collaboration and communication, of course. So,
and this group is another network for me and for others. So that's a great thing as well. More contacts here to consider these aspects. Thanks.
Which locations are you working at the moment then, in terms of current things on the boil?
So at the moment, I've got that by the Solomon Islands early warning system, working on that with DAF as well through that. That's my link at the moment.
So SOLS is a pretty big one for us. So what's going on there?
Yeah. I believe they're looking into Vanuatu as well for potential of biosecurity development. So there may be things in that area as well. And I didn't cover Timor. It's kind of funny it gets put into Pacific countries at times, where, despite being well out of the Pacific, but there's recently been some projects again working at sort of intergovernmental biosecurity development, which can be quite a big effort. they've just gotten in, I think last year they got into the World Trade Organization, and it took them 8 years of negotiations to get into that. So it's not an easy thing to do because of all the regulations, requirements for meeting those trade expectations. Yeah, there'll be more biosecurity development going on with that. And that's something that DAF has been involved in since their independence. So they had to create their own biosecurity system. So that's been going on for all that time.
I'm going to zoom. I need to
That was
zoom.
really interesting.
Thanks everybody for
Thank
joining
you.
us online.
Oh,
We look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.
with the HRB
Thank you.
vector being discovered in Tonga earlier this year, ACO is right in the middle of discussions about what they do with that.
That's
So we're wrapping up the citrus project at the moment, I lead, but there's probably another funded project opportunity somewhere around that whole HRB stuff.